Now, for anybody that's followed my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I have made many a video talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and the S&P in particular's love and affair with the United Nations and all that brings with it. The Sustainable Development Goals, of course, are 17 goals conjured up by the United Nations, targets to be achieved by 2030, hence the 2030 agenda, all in the wake of a bigger agenda, of course, which is that of Agenda 21. So one thing that really irritates me more often than not is when you see NGOs, so-called NGOs and charities and activists, etc., supposedly piling the pressure on the Scottish Government, and we're expected to believe that the Scottish Government aren't behind the facade of the pressure being applied, the aforementioned pressure from these NGOs, etc., despite the fact they share the same ideology and worldview as, in particular, the S&P, but not limited to, bear that in mind, as the video that I made 5 months ago, Rainbow Unicorn Parliament, to focus on Agenda 2030. They spent a whole 2.5 odd hour debate, all of them circle jerk talking about Agenda 2030. So they're all in on it, but Nicola Sturgeon in particular is the one biased aside that I detest, because she's the one that signed us up to it, but yet she stands there and waves her flag about it, prances about it, pretends she's a fucking nationalist, and she's not. You know, as it says here, in 2015, the First Minister announced Scotland's intention to sign up for the goals, as well as the Rainbow Unicorn Government's plan for implementation domestically in Scotland through the National Performance Framework and Scottish National Action Plan for Human Rights. A commitment which was very well received and viewed as Scotland providing international leadership on reducing inequality both domestically and internationally. In committing to the goals, Thin Lips declared that they offered a vision of the world that she believes Scotland shares too. Well, you didn't ask me. Ending poverty and hunger, securing education and health services, and combating inequality and achieving gender equality. That sounds great, the namby-pamby routine as per usual, but the reality of the matter is it is the precursor to global communism. It's no surprise, it's no coincidence that there's communists crawling out the woodwork in every single country. It's no surprise that we're seeing what looks to be some form of cultural revolution in the pipeline. Speaking at a Closing the Inequality Gap in Rainbow Unicorn Land and Around the Globe conference in 2015, in her keynote address, Thin Lips said that in pledging to implement the global goals, the Rainbow Unicorn Government had made a dual commitment to tackle poverty and inequality at home in Scotland, and to help developing countries to grow in a fair and sustainable manner. Now, it's no coincidence again that reduced inequalities is the one that Nicola Thin Lips holds up as a beacon in relation to wealth redistribution, ethnic minority representation, and so on and so forth, as well as safe, legal, regular and orderly migration. But bear in mind that climate action is goal 13, and all of last year we heard to no end from the goddess Greta Thunberg, as well as Nicola Thin Lips, who had her arm twisted by children protesting, demanding action because of Greta, the goddess. Nicola Thin Lips, of course, then had her arm twisted and began to declare a climate emergency, and the rest is history, literally in that respect, because it went quiet this year because of the so-called crisis. So that leads me to this. This is the latest in a long line of bogus examples of totally independent, nothing to do with the government at all, activists and whatnot, demanding change from the government. But they even say themselves down here in this letter that you have stated the need for recovery that cuts climate emissions by building a fairer, greener and more equal society, an aim that we strongly agree with. So let's not pretend that this isn't in Nicola Sturgeon's itinerary. Let's not pretend for one moment that she's not got the same worldview as these people, these whack jobs, if I'm honest, that have conjured this letter up. So anyway, it says 82 civil society organisations from across different sectors of Scottish life have written to Thin Lips calling for a radical response, being the operative word there, to the corona recovery that puts people before profits. The groups highlight how the double crises of coronavirus and climate change are exposing and worsening, deepening, damaging inequalities within society, and are calling on Thin Lips to ensure the recovery builds a fairer society for all. I mean, it was in the SNP's website, the Social Justice Commission and so on, the Wellbeing Economy, Sustainable Development, so putting people before profit. Oh, we've heard that one before. A fairer, socially just world, socially just Scotland, sustainable Scotland. Let's not pretend she doesn't share the same worldview. This is, in my opinion, all for show. All for show, because she herself shares this worldview, but she doesn't have to come out and say it. The activists do it on her behalf. The signatories from charities, trade unions and community groups set out 5 steps for the forthcoming recovery plan, an economic stimulus that will enable the building of a fairer, greener and more equal society. The Green Communists at their shit again. Dear Thinlips, representing a broad range of Scotland's civil society, our organisations wish to meet with you to discuss our emerging vision of Scotland, how Scotland can lead a radical response to the double crises of non-existent man-made climate change and coronavirus. Across the world, communities, institutions and governments are engaged in an unprecedented global effort to save lives and protect the most vulnerable. You know, that's saving lives, where it's estimated that the coronavirus death rate is round about 0.26. Granted, it's subject to change, but the fact of the matter is none of this has been justified. But isn't it funny? Isn't it just that little bit convenient, or too convenient, coincidental, whatever, that the likes of Nicola Thinlips and Justin Trudeau and many others like him and her have declared that we need a green recovery, a sustainable recovery out the other side of this. Isn't it funny how they've all made claims referring to the fact that the crisis, quote unquote, brought about by the lockdown, not the pandemic itself, have brought opportunities that have fallen into their laps that they wouldn't have thought possible prior. Isn't that funny? As coronavirus and non-existent man-made climate chaos tear apart people's lives globally, we are seeing pre-existing inequalities laid bare and exacerbated as the poorest suffer worst. Massive upheaval to people's daily lives is the present reality and immediate future because of your lockdown. Yet a simple return to business as usual is both unrealistic and undesirable. But it's also another thing. It's also been alluded to several times from several different Rainbow Unicorn politicians, including this one here, who says, Shona Robinson, who says that as we recover and rebuild, we must not return to the way things were, suggesting that it's not that we can't go back, we must not return to the way things were. Why? Because we need to create a sustainable Scotland, a green Scotland, etc. Don't hand me that bullshit. It's both unrealistic and undesirable. As Scotland moves past the peak of infections, our intention is turning to what comes next. You've stated the need for a recovery that cuts climate emissions by building fairer, greener, and more equal society. Of course. Well, and an aim that we strongly agree with. The COVID-19 crisis has laid bare how inequality is lethal to human life, but it has also shone a light on acts of solidarity and cooperation and centred the vital role of public services, key workers, and unpaid carers, key fucking workers, man. I'm sick of that term. You know, everybody's job is vital to them, but yet you've diminished these people and you've branded certain sectors key workers. A bunch of NHS workers, especially in Scotland, that have taken the pure piss sitting in empty hospitals while people that are elderly get no treatment, people that have got cancer operations have been postponed and whatnot, and then they make their stupid TikTok videos, but you want me to stand there like a seal and clap for them on a Thursday, go and F yourself. Amidst the global threat to human rights, of course, UN law, and democracy, the so-called crisis has also brought forward the possibility, here we go again, it's brought forward the possibility of an economic revival that ensures resilience to future crises, including the climate emergency. You see what's going on here? This so-called crisis, the crisis that was brought about by them, 1, leaving the borders open, still open to this day, and 2, putting us all into an economic shattering lockdown. Nothing to do with the pandemic itself, because that ship has sailed in terms of erring on the side of caution. You've not then retracted and admitted you were wrong, you've doubled down. And you've brought this shit up again. The SNP do it and these wankers are doing it. The crisis has brought forward the possibility of an economic revival that ensures resilience, quote unquote, whatever the fuck that means, to future crises, including the climate emergency that doesn't exist, that Sturgeon declared purely because Greta Thunberg and the children that learned shit in textbooks about climate change demanded to do. It's so shit what's going on here. Why can't people see this? The recovery from coronavirus is a rare chance. It's a rare chance. I mean, come on. It doesn't just fall in your lap, these things. It's so obvious. This is deliberate. This whole thing has been deliberate. And the point I'm trying to make here is people's lives are being ruined because these wankers have got an obsession. We're trying to cut carbon emission. It's a rare chance to markedly accelerate the repurposing of government. I mean, are you fucking serious? There should be less government, not more of it. Away from the prioritisation of economic growth and towards goals of well-being and sustainability. Sustainability, you say? Yeah, sustainability, of course. Sustainable development goals. How convenient. This is a time for system change. Don't worry, Sturgeon's already on that one. You don't need your shitty letter. There are steps we believe must be followed to deliver a just and green recovery. Provide essential public services for people, not profit. Expand public ownership of public services and boost investment, including in social care. Strengthen the NHS and cradle-to-grave education. Create a zero-carbon social and cooperative housing instead of buy-to-let. Okay. Oh, God. Protect marginalised people and those on low incomes by redistributing wealth. Who are marginalised people, you ask? Well, provide adequate incomes for all instead of bailouts for shareholders. Significantly raise taxes on the wealthy. Ensure all public workers receive at least a living wage, CBI. And strengthen health, safety and workers' rights, including access to flexible home working. Investigate and mitigate the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 and social distancing on women, children, young people, disabled, LGBTI, people of colour, key workers, unpaid carers, private renters and those on low incomes. You know what's funny though? Unless there's been an update, but to my knowledge there hasn't been. They continuously refer, in the case of people of colour, quote unquote, they refer to the England and Wales report or study that was done that somehow indicates that they're more disproportionately affected by coronavirus, etc. But yet in Scotland, the NHS report or study that was done, as I said, unless it's been updated, showed no difference at all. So they don't refer to that. They constantly refer to the English and Wales one despite being Scottish activists and whatnot. They're just so full of shit. But again, how does coronavirus and social distancing impact all these different groups bar, normal white men? Why are white men not included in this? Every group are white men. It's just insanity. But on top of that, again, it was your lockdown or the government's lockdown. It's not the virus itself and your stupid social distancing rules that are different in every country. Clive the clever coronavirus knows not to touch you if you... 2.1 meters. 2 meters is the limit here, but it's 1.5 in what Germany. It's 1.8 is what the CDC recommends. It's 1 meter what the WHO recommends. But no, here in Rainbow Unicorn it's 2 meters because Nicola Thinlip said so. Provide new funds to transform our society and economy. They're already on that. They're one step ahead of you with this shit. To meet Scotland's fair share of climate emissions cuts that barely make up anything in the total grand scheme of things. India and China are still allowed to pump out their emissions, and let's not beat around the bush here. It's bogus. This narrative of CO2 creating climate change is nonsense. It's nonsensical, but we have to play the little narrative here that the Green Communists want you to believe. Create and protect jobs and sustainable travel. Renewable heat, affordable, local and energy efficient, with ambitious green employment opportunities for young people and support for retraining where whole industries are affected. It's great. They keep this line peddled as well. They keep banging. This is how they entice the youngin. They keep talking about there's going to be jobs for all in the green sector. It doesn't mean that the green sector is actually going to make any financial benefit to the country. No, it's just a scam to reel it all in. Put measures in place to ensure all government programs tackle inequality, public health, and the just transition, socially just transition away from fossil fuels, because we have to stop making money. We have to cut back on our ways of making finance. That's what this is all about. Reduced inequalities on a global scale, well, they're not going to be pulling up the poorest countries of the world. No, they're going to pull down the richest countries in the world, and that's the point. Excluding rogue employers, tax avoiders, and major polluters and arms manufacturers from bailouts. Okay. Strengthen democracy and human rights. Human rights, by the way, are the United Nations laws, superseding our own. During these crises, withdraw new police powers, surveillance measures, and restrictions on protests as soon as possible. What about all the protesters for Black Lives Matter? No, not them. Of course, it's the far-right thugs that are protecting statues. I forgot, sorry. Enable full scrutiny of planning and policy decisions. Create an independent recovery commission founded on participatory democracy to engage and empower communities. Empower communities, that communitarianism rhetoric, yet again. Trade unions and civil society. Introduce fundamental human rights into Scot law so that safety nets are always in place for the most vulnerable. First is solidarity across borders, proactively supporting an international coronavirus and non-existent man-made climate emergency response that challenges the scapegoating of migrants. What the fuck does the scapegoating of migrants have to do with the so-called climate emergency? The reality of the matter is you talk about carbon footprints, but yet you want to import the third world and Africa into our countries. You talk about the so-called climate refugees, despite the fact climate change is a load of fucking bollocks. It's just remarkable here. What the fuck does that have to do with a climate emergency? centres on the worst affected, and not to mention scapegoating migrants. If we want to believe that there's a pandemic out there, it got to Scotland somehow. If it started in China and got to Scotland, there's only two ways I can think of how it got here. Tourism, or is it migrants? What is it? Either way, the border should have been shut, but that's one thing that Scotland never did. So bear that in mind. Scapegoating migrants is a very good case to have the border shut, in my opinion. But whatever. Develop environmental bodies and ensure equitable access to COVID-19 treatment. Use the UN climate talk in Glasgow to push for robust implementation of the cancerous Paris deal, platforming the voices of Indigenous. I thought we were Indigenous to Scotland. Of course, we're not though, because we're white. And frontline communities in advancing climate finance and global debt cancellation. Ensure coherence between all domestic policy and global sustainable development outcomes. Yes. Decisions made in time of crisis of long-lasting consequences. After 2018 financial crisis, inequality grew and climate emissions spiraled. We want to see this moment seized for the common good, not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Civil society has a central role to play in helping shape Scotland's future in this unprecedented time that we manufactured and premeditated. We look forward to meeting with you, yada yada yada. And there's a long list of these absolute brain-dead wonkers. But it's communism for you. Peace.